Windows credentials. All right, this one. Start the video.
Okay.
All right, you got it started. Okay, yes, now open forum questions. Everybody's got answers? Dennis, you got a question?
Not at the
It looked
moment.
like you had one there.
Nope, not at the moment.
Go ahead, Sid.
I'll throw out a question. Did anybody buy stuff for Prime Days?
Not really.
Mm-mm.
I did purchase some more Kindle books that I could get the 3 times credit. And because I started going through Jack Reacher books, and I started May 30th, and I think I've already gone through the 12th or 13th novel so far.
On the New York Times, I was reading that on the first day, they said there wasn't hardly anything worthwhile being offered, and they only came up with a very short list of a few items that they could recommend.
Did you buy anything, Sid?
Nope.
I bought a dog toy for Serpy it was back down under $5, went down to $4.85. So I got it. It came today. I didn't care much for the color they chose, purple, but I got that. I bought a wallet to replace the one that was stolen.
Aren't dogs colorblind, so they wouldn't be able to tell what color it is?
Hey, Sid, make sure you lose that before you put stuff into it.
Pre-lose it, yes.
Yeah, it has anti-RFID lining on it. For what that,
it doesn't do any good if they pick your pocket.
This is true. So I did that, and then I bought actually from Newegg a new 20 terabyte external Western Digital drive.
20
because you could 20 terabyte for $275.
20 terabyte. Wow.
Yeah.
No, I didn't wait for Prime Day. Instead, on Friday evening, I was using my old Delta DP400 drill press. This is about 30 years old. And it happened, I was turning it on and I went to turn it off and it stayed running. And so I thought, oh, crap, the fuses, the switch is fused shut. So, I'll have to get a new switch for this. So I happened to type into my web browser Delta DP400 power switch, and I had 4 or 5 offerings, and Amazon was going to deliver it to me on, no, actually, this is on Saturday. They're going to deliver it to me Sunday afternoon. So I ordered this part for a 30-year-old drill press, and looks just like the original. Snapped it in, put it in, worked like a champ. Just amazing that in the past you had to go running around or call up somebody, mail order, find the part number, and then find out, oh, that is no longer available. Similarly, previously in the week before, I decided to finally replace the grass catcher on my Toro riding turf cutter. And I went and found the part number, and based on your serial number, it's this part number. And I look down to it, and I go to the Toro website, and it says obsolete. Oh, wonderful. Oh. So then I used that same part number, typed it in Amazon. Here's an aftermarket. $35, it's yours. It comes with all the pieces you need too. Yeah. Didn't come with the bottle of PV blaster I needed to loosen the nut that had turned into a solid piece of iron, but I was able to remove it from the mower and put the new one on, and now it's back and working again. Amazing. But just the ability to find parts for things that, like this turf cutter I bought in 2015, so it's 9 years old, and already its parts are obsolete, but the drill press, no problem, just order this. Yeah, and it's a special kind of switch. It's not just a toggle switch. It's one of these switches that you can put a key in and pull it out so the kids can't turn it on by themselves.
Yeah, speaking of parts, has anybody tried to get a Toyota car repaired lately?
Not in about 6 months. I have.
15,000 dealers got their entire, it's the equivalent of the point of sale system for a car dealership, totally knocked offline by cyber attack.
I thought it was more than Toyota, though. I thought it was more than that. Other new car dealers that were using this particular system.
I think it was mostly, at least in my area, it was entirely Toyota. It was mostly these 15,000 Toyota dealers and their repair shops and any repair shop that was getting parts from them.
Because I had to do a oil change, and it was really bizarre the way the invoice came out. Okay, so I had a coupon for an oil change for my Chevy Traverse, and it was like up to 6 quarts of oil, including synthetic, for $29.95. Like, whoa!
Yeah.
Normally it's $50.
Yeah,
If they dropped that. Yeah, so I happened to. I'm going over there. Went over there, and I'm looking at the receipt as like. Here's the charge. It was like $59 plus all the shop fees and everything. It turns out to be like $99 or $100 and some of them. But then there's $100 credit that says insurance. It comes out of nowhere, and that's how it gets down to the $29, and then tax was like $37. Wow.
So did they have to write out everything by hand?
No, they did it electronically. So I think, okay, then, obviously it's not, at least not on the service side. But then I'm not saying if I'd gone to parts, that might have been something else.
Then they were not hit by this cyber attack. The dealers that were hit and the repair shops that were hit were reduced to actually having to do things on paper. I think the company that was running it is called CDK, and they were the ones who took over ADP.
My son-in-law works for the companies that are behind the Toyota public-facing websites for advertising.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for those kinds of things, he's involved with some of those, but he didn't mention anything about anybody trying to breach that system.
No, that I believe is a different vendor. Yeah. This particular vendor, apparently they got sloppy about security.
I think they used Global Crossing or something, I think.
And then somebody, Global Crossing was okay. They were specifically mentioned in the articles as having not been hit.
Right.
But this other place was hit. It was by a Russian-linked organization. And so these cyber attacks aren't just for us individuals.
Nope, not anymore. They'll try and get anyone they can.
Yeah, it's scary out there. I was at a Sophos event this week, and they were talking about some of the latest breach techniques going on. It's scary stuff. I got to appreciate it, by the way. They did a lunch and learn, and they did it at something de Chao. Fogo de Chao?
Yeah, Fogo de Chao, which is a Brazilian work.
So they spent the whole lunch coming around carving meats and putting it on our plates.
Oh yeah,
it's not a bad way to do a lunch and learn. And
they were still able to talk around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Then they brought these giant pieces of dessert cake, and then they had the whole salad bar thing, and they did plenty of stuff to eat. I didn't have dinner that night. I was volunteering at the Northern Illinois Food Bank, and by the time I got home, I didn't feel like eating anything anyway.
Yeah. I've had a lunch at that place, at least our version of it out here.
I was just going through the ideas that how spammers are trying to get into people's brains and such. I had gotten a text message from a 603 area code, and it said it was supposed to be from USPS. Your package is on hold because of incomplete address details. And I'm thinking, if they know what my cell phone number is from USPS, they know who I am.
Yeah, I get a bunch of those, and my Pixel phone automatically spam classifies those.
Yeah. This one happened to slip through, and I just happened to catch it. Like, nope, you're spam. Boom, burned. So I did finally move to this. It took me, like I said, the better part of a day to get everything off of the old one. I also migrated from a 64 gig to a 256 gig SD card. So there's more than enough room on that. Transferred all of my photos to that, so that I have plenty of room on the new one. And the new phone, it comes with, I think it's 256 gig of memory as well. So, and I'm still, like I said, going through some of the things like, oh, here's another app that I haven't run on here yet. Now I got to remember what its user account and password is so that it's happy with it. Yeah. There it is.
I read something in the past week. I think it was in the Tech for Senior newsletter, and it said that now, maybe this is old news, but it just said that now Apple and Google together allow transferring of photos and stuff between them without any issues now. Or is that something new, or has that been around for a while?
Well, I don't know about the photos, but I do know that messaging, uh, Android is on one thing, and that's by Google, and Apple was on a different messaging system, and they resisted for a very long time, but now they're going to allow messaging across Apple and Android.
Okay.
I do
I-
know when I
But this
switched
th-
phones.
this particular one was about photos.
Okay.
And I think they were different photo apps between Apple and Google,
Yeah,
or
are.
they were between the iCloud. Oh, it was iCloud and Google Drive. iCloud and Google Drive. You can transfer certain types of things. You didn't used to be able to go directly between them.
So that's
Yeah.
new. It's new then.
Yeah, it is.
So when I was migrating, the other thing I had to do was I could not find on my current version of the Verizon messages, it no longer had wherever I had to stumbled on before to do a backup of the messages was now gone. That seemed to have disappeared along the way. And I didn't want to necessarily trust the full phone backup to see if it was going to get everything or not. So I switched back to SMS backup and restore, and I did a full backup of all of my messages, and it put it up on Google Drive for me then. So it has an extra copy up there, and I used it to restore, and it looked like I got all of my messages, and about 400 megabytes worth of messages came down, and it seemed to be happy again. But the new messaging app that I ended up moving to was the standard messages on Android, which uses RCS messaging. And I noticed that my phone, when I first powered it up and started using it, it came up on Android 13 for about 2 hours, and then it got migrated to Android 14. So hopefully this gun keeps me for a little bit. It's got 5,000 milliampere hour battery, and it's got 6 gig of main memory. So most of the time with these Android 13 and 14, I noticed it uses about 4 gig of memory just to keep it happy with hardly anything running. That gives you about 2 gig to have your other apps. So, but it did work. I have to now plan on moving my wife's phone across the same way. And I'll just have to remember I'll have my phone available when her SIM card needs to re-register. And said, oh, we need to send a text message to identify you. Yes, Sid.
Has anybody here played with Google Fi?
Google what?
Fi. Fi. It's their cellular service. I'm a super pixel user, which doesn't mean a lot, but they sent me an offer for 3 free months of unlimited plus, along with 6 free months of Google, whatever, YouTube premium along with a couple other goodies, but I've never used Fi.
Whose network did they end up using?
I want to say they go across networks, is my understanding. They can on the fly flip between them depending on data. And I thought it was they used Verizon and T-Mobile.
Well, it would make sense. They try and use Verizon as much as they possible for coverage and T-Mobile for 5G. Check
So no,
coverage.
yeah, so nobody here used them. Did you see AT&T got encrypted from ransomware and paid off a huge lump of money to the bad guys to get their data back?
I got a notice from AT&T about a breach, which
Yes.
Yeah.
involved my social
Yeah.
security number, which they should never have had.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought I saw that every one of their accounts was taken. Not just some, all.
Yep. Well, mine was.
77 million.
Mine was from 8 years ago.
I haven't gotten a notice yet, but well, I'm waiting to see because I did have some AT&T service in the distant past.
Oh, I had it too in the distant past.
But there still was some stuff that even then, this isn't their first breach. There was a previous breach for which I have some number of years of coverage to protect my account from any sort of breach. And I think, where did you still have that from? Is that 2012 or earlier? Yes.
This time they're offering, at least I got offered 2 years of monitoring.
Yeah,
But it's with the same company I'm already with for some other
Yeah.
fraud.
It's amazing. Like, okay, can I just
Yeah.
keep this rolling? Here's this off, this breach.
You know, eventually I think they will do that. Everybody's going to have monitoring
Yeah.
forever.
I mean, forever, yes. And then call you if anything else is messed up like that.
And they'll call you after something happens. Or
Well.
they'll notify you after something happens.
Well, I hope so because they can't notify us before it happens.
Why not? Why
Yeah.
can't they?
Because
proactively?
they only got foreign crystal balls. They're in the repair shops waiting for parts.
Yeah.
I'm afraid so. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these attacks are very predictable if you knew what was going on inside the companies.
Oh, yeah. And most of the time, it's misconfiguring or not updating the software of the operating system.
Or allowing an outside vendor too many privileges.
Well, that too. Usually it's a contractor, outside contractor.
Yep.
And
Or
when
it's somebody
they no
who's
longer do
pretending
business
to
with
be
them,
a contractor.
they don't cancel it out.
Well, they have too many permissions to begin with. They have access to parts of the system that they don't need access to.
Right.
At least that's what happened to Target.
Well, it's a lot of cases where they got in because of a outside contractor that doesn't work for the outfit for a long time, but they didn't disable his account information.
That too.
That's
You
ridiculous.
know, if your company name is Target, you should be more careful because you're already a target.
Well, what the bad guys are going after on these back end attacks are the companies that they think can pay the most money.
Yeah.
Because there
That is-
was a breach in 2018 from AT&T that had 7.5 million account holders and 65.4 million former account owners. That's the one that I think I had seen. But I haven't been notified yet, but they could have easily have lost my email address by now.
Well, they didn't lose my social security number. Why would they lose your email address?
Because that's more valuable to them than your social security number.
But Social Security number is not unique. You know what the other piece of information that is required to go with Social Security number?
Hmm.
Birth date.
Yeah, well, that's
If you
that's
look,
also in the accounts.
there's only 9 digits. Not always. They don't always have birth date. Yeah, they may be able to get it from other sources, but they've been trying to narrow down the places that exists. But you have to have both of those together. And it's the same thing, I believe, with Medicare. Medicare, even though it looks like it's a more unique hash, because I think it is still derived from a Social Security number. And they always require a birth date with it. So
Yeah, but all health systems and insurance companies have that information.
usually,
They store both.
I know.
And they store them together.
Yeah. It makes it easier to do the transaction.
easier for a breach.
Yeah.
More stuff to lose. Yeah, and by the way, we lost all of your medical records, but the hackers have them. So if you need them, call this hacker up. He'll send you your x-rays.
That's probably true. More than you really know.
But like they really would need that x-ray that took like about 600 megabytes of storage. He's got the storage to hold on to it. Hey, knock your socks off, guy. I'll let you know when I need it.
Well, look at CT scans that they do. And they put those usually on a DVD drive disc if you want it. Or you need it for one of your doctors who doesn't want to get it directly.
If he can get it directly, because not all of those systems, because I've noticed the Advocate and the Northwestern, they both have the exact same display, except that the name at the top changes.
Yep.
But they couldn't get stuff back and forth between the two. And I have brought some DVDs, and they weren't able to read the DVDs the first time we brought them in. So I took them, put them back on one of my machines. I believe the DVDs were not finalized, and they were trying to read it on a ROM drive. If you want to read a unfinalized DVD, you got to put it in an RW drive. Then you finalize it, or you can copy all the information. What I did is I copied all the information over to a flash stick. And I brought the flash stick, says, here, try this. I downloaded all the content from both of those 2 DVDs onto this flash drive. Oh, that works fine. So the DVD isn't always the solution.
No.
If they don't remember to finalize it at the last step before it goes to somebody else.
I only had one, and I did look at it before I took it to the doctor, and the doctor looked at it and then gave it back to me.
Yeah, I ended up with 2 copies of it along the way because I called them up and so you can come and pick them up, and then they mailed me a second copy anyway. So I thought, okay, I had 2 sets. I gave one set away and they couldn't read it, and I said, here's the flash drive. I have my set here any time I need it. But those are obsolete X-rays anyway.
Yeah.
Everything's changed inside.
But look at Japan. Japan just recently gave up the floppy disk.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
No, it's more than a possibility. It was written up.
Well, do you still have a source of new floppy disk drives?
No.
Are you using them anywhere?
I stopped using floppy disk drives about 15 or more years ago.
Yeah, pretty much. I think I have one machine that still has a floppy disk drive on it.
Oh, I might have a machine with a floppy disk drive on it, but I don't even know if it works. I got no media to stick in it.
I'm not sure. I mean, I probably have some media to stick in it. I probably have a copy of, let's see, probably DOS 6.22 original discs.
Yeah, but are they still
newer. I
readable?
have DOS 1.
Well, I had DOS. I probably have DOS 1 around here somewheres, but that's on a single-sided 5¼ inch floppy.
My friend Ben had 8 boxes still sealed of 8-inch single-sided discs.
Were they hard or soft sectored?
Yeah, good. Ben's no longer with us, so the discs are no longer nearby. And I'm not sure, but I just think it's kind of funny that he kept 8 boxes of 8 inchers around.
Well,
And how many
I
people?
probably have an 8-inch disc around, and my 14-inch hard platter disc drive is outside protecting the bird feeder right now.
I have 2 8-inch drives. I don't know if they work, but I got 2 8-inch drives.
I think I
How
got
many?
rid of
How many
it.
people still have zip drives?
I've
I have
got
a zip drive.
Zip and Jazz,
My
but I
dad's
haven't touched
estate,
them in God knows when.
my dad's estate had jazz and zip drives and media.
I have both the zip drive that interfaces on a floppy controller and a zip drive that plugs in on a Centronics printer connector.
Yep.
And
And then
probably
you
still
had
have
the
some
old
data on it too.
Bernoulli drives.
No, I never got
Bernoulli's.
a Bernoulli.
I don't think my dad ever got Bernoulli, or if he did, he didn't
Yeah.
keep it very long.
I had the big 10 meg Bernoullis with a special cable that hooked to the PC and the Apple. So I could run UCSD on the Apple off the Bernoulli drives. $3,700 for a dual 10 meg Bernoulli box.
Wow.
Yeah, you're saying Apple, which means that you had Apple computers, whereas my dad had the IBM.
Well, I had a cable to go to both of them. So it went to the Apple II and it went to the IBM PC. It went to both. So
Yeah, the hookups were different.
yeah.
My
Yeah.
original IBM PC, when I started all this stuff from, I got on April Fool's Day, 1982. And it did not have, it wasn't an XT, it was a PC, but I upgraded it from a single-sided drive to 2 double-sided drives. I had a hard disk controller, but because I didn't have the boot ROM for it, I modified a boot block on a floppy drive to insert the boot sequence in on the disk controller. And so it would be able to boot up on the hard drive after it first blipped on the floppy drive, and then it would boot off of the hard disk, which was trying to remember. It wasn't an ST238, but it was a brother of that. It used an RLL controller, so it would have 100 megabytes of storage. So yeah, and it had I only had 64 meg on the motherboard, which then had a quadram card for expansion that took it up to, I had 768 on it because I didn't have a graphics card. I had a monochrome card still on it. Yes, now that's dating me.
You've
Last time I tried
basically
it still
proven
booted.
we're old.
Yeah. I don't think the monochrome monitor will probably still work. It might. Last time I did fire it up, though, it did fire up like, oh, okay, it's still there. DOS is still here. Yeah. But that's when I did a lot of C code on that particular machine. Yes. Anybody still remember the Lattice C compiler?
Hmm.
One of the first C compilers that was available before Microsoft C was available, long before. They had Lattice C, and that was pricey too at the time. Yes. Okay. Let's see. How are we doing here? Let me see if I got my presentation. Dig it up here. Okay. That is not the right one. Yes. Right. Let's move this over a little bit. Okay. Yes. All right. Now, let's see if this shares nicely. No, that's not the right one either. Hang on a second.
Who do you keep talking to, Ed?
I'm arguing with myself.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, let me throw something else out while Ed is doing that. So like Bob said, they got his social security number. So we hear about all these breaches where they're ending up with our credit card numbers, our birth dates, our social security numbers, all this information. Is there anything that we've seen yet where they're taking information that they have and actually going after the individuals with this information?
Oh, yeah.
Ask
We,
Sanford that question.
Ask Sid how many of his accounts they tried to use.
ooh,
Yeah.
And
And fast.
yeah, they do it within minutes because they know they're going to get locked out. If
well,
somebody takes an iPhone, for example, and it's open and you've got financial apps open, oh, you can lose so much so fast.
And it may
but
not
that's
be
a
covered.
particular robbery, or how do they get access? I mean, is that the wallet
They
being
just
stolen?
you're just like at a bar or something, and you've got your phone open and you're doing stuff. You lay down the phone for just a second,
It's
and
gone.
it's
Well,
gone.
I didn't mean that so much as something like an AT&T where they get 70 million records. Do we,
Hmm.
or some other company where they get millions of records? Have there been things
That's
we've
on the
heard about
black
where they're
market.
using those?
That's sold
Uh,
on the black market.
yeah, on the dark web, there are sites where they compile databases. There's one that has something like billions of passwords and other credentials that I that were compiled over maybe 20 years, and they're just sitting on this, waiting to see if maybe this will work or that'll work, selling off parts of it as part of a kit.
Okay.
So yeah, years and years later, you could have something happen.
Usually, the hacker, whoever the hacker may be, whether it's an individual or a group, don't use the data themselves. They sell off chunks of it to people who are willing to take the risk of doing it. And the amount of money they're getting is seems like next to nothing. But when you consider how much they're sitting on, the hackers, they can make one hell of a fortune off of selling little blocks because I think they only sell them about 100 at a time.
Okay. Okay.
Now, why doesn't it happen like in the movies where the guy accidentally breaks into the mafia's bank and has that compromised, and
I wish that would happen.
then we don't hear these guys anymore.
Yeah, then we have contracts out galore.
Yeah,
Well, one reason they don't break into Russia's banks is that they are backed by Russia.
yeah.
Some of them, including the guys who hit Toyota's vendor.
So I think you're saying if I legally change my name to Vladimir Putin, that I have a lesser risk of being perpetrated against.
Maybe.
Any Russian or Ukrainian name.
Either that or Vladimir will be using your accounts. Yeah. Okay. So this is the presentation that I have for tonight. This came to me after Sunday and Monday. We had approximately 25 tornadoes in our greater Chicagoland area.
Yeah, and the first time for 2 days, consecutive days, to have tornadoes.
And one was an EF2. Most of them were smaller ones, but that doesn't help if your house was the thing that just got taken out by an EF1. So, yes, I don't think any of them got too close to my neck of the woods, but there was definitely a fair amount of rain and things washed away. So,
Yeah, there was
so
one person that I know of killed, and that was in Cedar Lake, Indiana, pretty good distance south of me.
yeah. So, anyhow, I thought this is something that probably a lot of people haven't thought about too much. And if we prepare for some of these things, we might be a little bit better to handle the aftermath. So, let's see if I can get off of here. I don't need that little thing. Climate change, whether you believe it or not, we definitely have things that are changing. And one of the side effects of this is a less temperate weather, because with all of the things that have changed and the atmosphere heating up and the oceans being warmer, we're getting larger storms. We're getting the earliest class 5 hurricane. We have tornado activity that is increasing. Heat domes and drought, which cause wildfires and other destruction. Storm damage has caused power outages. I think people in Houston, there's still 20 or 30,000 people that still haven't had power after a week. Internet phone outages that can be caused by some of these things, flooding, rivers overflowing the banks. All of these things influence our lives, and we should possibly look at some of the ways to mitigate some of these things. We can't do anything too much about the weather or the conditions, but we can mitigate some of the after effects. So I'm going to break it down into power issues of all sorts, internet outages, and environmental issues. Power or lack of. Electric power is only rated at 3 nines uptime, 99.9%. That means on the average, your house is without power about 525 minutes each year. Now, it could be for a couple minutes, it could be for an hour, but number of hours add up, that's less than 10 hours. Brownouts happen, most likely under heavy grid usage. So when we have lots of air conditioning and people demand for power is high, the voltage drops. If you have a ting unit like I do right here behind me plugged into the wall, you can monitor some of these things, and it reminds me every time there is an outage or a brownout and tells me approximately how many other people are sharing my brownout condition. During the light loading of the grid, you can see power surges. I've seen surges as high as 145 volts on either side of the main, which is a lot of voltage coming in. You can remedy some of the power outages with multiple types of sources for it. You can use generators. If you can have both portable or fixed that have automatically start and cut over. That's okay as long as fuel is available. If you got a natural gas hookup and you can use natural gas and it's still being pumped, you can use that until the cows come home. However, you're still rather expensive at your price per kilowatt compared to what the utility is supplying you. So you can't just run on natural gas all the time. And the generators themselves have a finite life. Usually around 15,000 hours, you have to start thinking about replacing brushes or some other components in the generator, something they don't happen to mention too often. Rechargeable power banks can supply power to cell phones as long as they have adequate capacity and you've charged them in advance. It's not good having a charger, if it's not been charged up and it's depleted and you need it. Solar panels can be used for several types of uses. They can recharge power banks. They can actually power smaller appliances, but the typical solar panel operation does not usually work off grid. The inverters that you use, that you connect to solar panels, frequently have a requirement that they have to see voltage before they will present voltage to the grid. So they will work in synchronization with an additional power source that's already present, whether it be a generator, whether it be something else. You can get standalone inverters that will work and convert the 24 or 48 volt power from a typical solar panel and then supply that and use it to power devices if you have extended outages. Wind turbines similarly have a similar kind of restriction on the inverter. Sometimes you can use your electric powered car as a power source to power the house, but that has limited benefit and is good for a short-term outage, not for more than 3 or 4 days, unless you use very little power. You can use power strips with overload and surge protection to help protect some of your sensitive equipment. But longer power outage durations, you may have to have more efficient. You don't necessarily want to be lugging a lot of gasoline around. Typical 3,000 watt generator is going to go through about 4 to 5 gallons a night if it's running at anywhere more than half power. Short-term power issues. UPSs can alleviate short-term power issues if they're properly maintained. And I would be willing to put that most of the people on this call that might have a UPS probably don't remember when they changed the battery last. Batteries last about 3 years, 4 in a pinch. Anything more than 4, you just haven't seen a power outage long enough to have your UPS crash. Run duration is highly dependent on the load supported. So if you use something like PowerShoot with an APC and you plug into it, it'll see what your current drain is and give you a rough idea of how long this thing will run when the power fails. One of my devices, it'll run maybe 45 minutes because I happen to have the cable box plugged into it, and that draws an additional 5 watts or so. So that says, oh, you're using about 70 watts here. You got about 40 some odd minutes of power. With the other unit that basically just backs up the blink cameras and I think my NAS drive, which is in standby most of the time, it says it can sit there for 368 minutes before it'll fail. At least that's what it says with the current batteries. The batteries are probably due to be changed in them soon. Other devices, such as alarm systems, key entry systems that are used in businesses, security cameras, might also include standby battery sources, which also you need to replace the batteries on a periodic basis. Whenever you replace a lead-acid battery in one of those items, you should date it when you put it on the side, so you know, okay, yes, it's due. It's been 4 years. It's time to get a new battery. Internet outages usually happen at the same time as your power outages if you don't have a UPS, because with no power, the cable modem is not going to run. But it could be the internet supplier's problem as well, and Comcast is no shortage of outages in their case. Oh, we're upgrading you. Oh, you'll be out for 6 hours. Being prepared for that is probably your better remedy for this. You can use a Wi-Fi hotspot or a cell phone that has hotspot or tether options like PDA-Net. Either of those options can substitute during an internet outage for as long as you still have your cellular service. Having that hotspot option and tested beforehand will lead to less of a crisis when the internet is out. Typically, you see internet outages that happen when you don't have power outages in winter storms. Environmental issues. In periods of extreme weather, you need to have taken precautions in advance. If you've prepared for disasters, which can happen in your area, you are several steps ahead of most of the people. Heat issues, limiting use of electrical items is usually a good idea. Less unnecessary load on the grid helps everyone. And the extreme cold or extreme heat depends on the cooling plant to be in good working order. If you don't have it periodically checked or maintain it yourself, then who's to blame? Water issues, flood watches. Location is always important. Remember they say location, location, location? Well, if you got a basement and groundwater is an issue, you know what a sump pump is, and you may have more than one. I have 2, and I periodically have to replace these on a regular basis because they do rust out. Even though they may be plastic, the impeller breaks, so they fail. And having a second sump pump with adequate capacity is always advised in areas with continuous groundwater And in my case, I even have a backup sitting right next to the sump pump pit with all of the necessary plastic pipe installed to be able to be subbed out in about 20 minutes. Battery operated sump pumps are usually not adequate to run for any extended time because these things run on 12-volt batteries and they pull about 20 to 30 amps of power, which basically turns into just about 360 some odd watts or so. That's not a lot on a sump pump. When a 1 horsepower sump pump ideally should only draw 746 watts, but typically draws about 12 amps on your 120 volt line, that's 1400 watts. You quickly see the difference between this little battery operated pump versus a sump pump, which is like comparing a fountain pump with a real sump pump. Making sure that the water leaving your building is going in the right place is important. If you pump it outside and you don't have adequate pitch to keep the water from coming back in, it can run back in along the foundation, find the foundation's drain tile, come back in again. Now you're pumping water in a circle. You need to have it at least 10 feet away from the foundation. Putting your computer equipment in places like the basement might be more convenient, as the heat from a computer can dissipate in the cooler basement, but if water's a problem, you risk damage. That's why when I see people that have their computers in their basement, I said, okay, hope you're protected against flooding. In places with wildfire issues, having proper plantings away from the house is also important. Non-combustible house materials can also improve the survivability of the house. Use of non-vegetation near the building, decorative rocks, can lessen fire susceptibility. But then you have to ask yourself a question. Do you have a source of water in case the water system is compromised or is unavailable? I used to have a water system in Cary that typically would, oh, we have no water pressure. We have no water today. Do you have a source of water in case you want to do something? Do you have a food stockpile that you, in case you should be unable to find food nearby? And here's the other question. If it's an extended outage, do you have the monetary supplies that you could use if electronic banking was disrupted? People can't take a credit card and they can take cash. Well, you better have the cash available so that you can barter for something to eat.
Why?
Because if they can't use their credit cards, they won't sell you anything unless it's cash.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that. I'm sorry, all of our credit cards are down. Everyone just left their baskets as is and left the room. Yeah. But is your data prepared for a calamity? Okay, do you have a backup disk drive with a copy of your current backup available should you need to leave your house to evacuation? Are your backups in a fire-resistant safe or location? And are they protected in case of water, like flooding? Like if you have a backup in the basement and your basement floods, disk drives may be hermetically sealed, but they're not totally sealed. The electronics can't afford to get wet. And if water seeps in around the bearing, it toasts the hard drive as well. I don't know about solid state drives. If you could totally dry them out, would they still be able to be okay? You may have to rinse them with distilled water and get all residues of any salts off of the surface of it. Do you have a portable computer that, with most of your day-to-day information available, that you could take with? Many phones support email accounts, but not everyone does banking on their phones. I choose not to do banking on my phone for that reason. And if something happened to you, would others be able to pick up where you left off? Okay, people, passwords, profiles, PPP, just like the commercial. Stroke, death, payment of bills and e-invoices. What happens if you're gone? Is there a place that you can point to that says, here's my list of acronym passwords and here's what the acronyms mean? Do you have a decrypted copy of your passwords available in case somebody needs to take over for you? Does someone else have the ability to unlock your phone should that become necessary? If you use a fingerprint or a face face unlock, good luck if your face is no longer available. There has to be a second way to unlock it. Sometimes they will allow a PIN code, depends on your carrier. And you need that phone for all the two-factor authentication and access that phone might be needed for. Yes. So I started with the thought that, well, calamities, that would be something. But then I also thought, well, what is the other calamity that could befall us? I happen to have a younger brother that had a stroke, and he couldn't remember all of his passwords. And he had committed most of them to memory, unfortunately. But I was fortunate in some places he was able to either have a copy of them or it was saved in the internet browser that he was using. So some of them were easier to get into. But the system administrator password on his laptop, he couldn't quite remember what it was. But I had an idea of the flavors he used, and I was able to guess at some of them. But if you've ever had to do this for someone, they'll know what I mean. So, do I have any questions?
Well, one thing I started looking into backup house generators a while back, and you mentioned I remember looking at Generac, and they sell like 90% of the market, and it said the average life of a Generac generator is like 3,000 hours. And I was kind of shocked how low that is.
Yeah, that's lower than normal. The normal thing is like about 15,000 hours before the brushes have to be replaced. But it depends on what capacity you have and how much they overbuilt it. Because, let's see if I can find this. I need to find this part right here.
Because I was thinking of getting something that maybe ran on natural gas. But then again, you hear about natural gas and contributing to.
Well, if you think that's something, if you
You
live in a more
can hook it
rural,
up to natural gas, but as I was recently informed, when they replaced my gas line before was 5/8. They replaced it with a 1-inch gas line, and I asked them why they were putting such a large gas line. Oh, that's in case you need to have a generator. Oh, you mean I wouldn't have been able to run a generator on that other line? And he said, probably not.
Huh.
So if you're going to use a natural gas generator, you're going to be counting on them digging up your yard to put in a 1-inch gas line, and sometimes it's at your expense. Mine was done because there was a leak on their side of the meter, and they said, okay, we'll just replace this, and they ripped up my yard, and then they put it back again, and it didn't cost me anything.
if you live in a rural area, something like the Generac generators, they run on LP also. But God
and you
knows
get more
what your
power
cost.
out of LP.
Pardon?
You get more power out of LP as opposed to natural gas.
It's just a case where I have a cousin in Ohio that owns a business, and part of his business is installing the Generac generators. It is in a fairly rural area, so how many of them have natural gas versus bottled gas?
Right. I mean, in like in Western Michigan, it's hit or miss as to whether or not they ran gas into those subdivisions. So a lot of the houses there are electric only. Although their gas or the electric prices are much lower than they are here, they are much cheaper because the nuclear power plant is right there on the shore of Lake Michigan. The Cook nuclear power generator is sitting right there. So they can afford to make it cheaper. But the other thing that you run into with LP supplies are with LP gas running through a house, it does not there's no scent added to it. So if you have a gas leak, you normally can't detect propane smell. And propane is heavier than air. So propane sinks and it collects in low spaces. So You have to be cognizant of that. People have had their garages disappear in the night because their gas line went from the bottle in the back and went through the garage toward the house, and there was a leak along there, and then boom, there's no garage anymore. But yes, all of those things have to be taken into account. I mean, I could see where you could put in, if you have a wide expanse, could put a set of solar panels and put in a power wall and basically go mostly off the grid except for exceptional energy usage. Or if you limit your air conditioning to a single room, you might be able to get by. But depends on how many panels you want to put in and lifetime of the panels, lifetime of like a power wall. I mean, Tesla makes the power wall, and you can get those in various, 1, 2, or 3x if you want. But now you have a large lithium battery sitting there in some portion of your residence, and you have to think, well, is this ever going to go bad?
Yeah, are you going to have a fire?
60 Minutes had a thing in there where they showed some of the electric power generation that's done in California now, and they just had this massive, I want to say it was 200 or 300 acres of solar cells, and they had a set of these cabinets that were basically old electric car batteries that were being used to store the power during the day, and they could be delivered at night. And I forget, it was 20,000 homes it could supply. And I'd have to go back and look at that thing again and get the actual number. But it was very impressive. But they have the Mojave Desert there, which has sunlight 300 some odd days of the year.
Mm.
We are not so fortunate here. My solar energy is being used up by a couple of large deciduous trees. So that trying to put them on my house would not work so well. I would only get sun for a portion of the day. And if you start doing the calculations, each one of these 2 foot by 4 foot panels gets you about 100 to 150 watts in full sun. And you need a lot of watts to make up for your steady state usage in your house. So if I had 4 of those panels, that would cover most of my minuscule power drain from all the devices that are plugged in. But that wouldn't get me anything if I needed to run the furnace. Furnace kicking on the blower, that's another 1,000 watts that goes in. Air conditioning kicks in with the blower and a couple lights going. Yeah, it's about 4,000 or 5,000 watts that are clicking through. You don't quite run that on a solar cell. Like a power wall could run it, and you don't need to run it for the entire day, but I happened to look at one of my power usages in our heat wave that we had recently. I used 44 kilowatts in a day. And that was just the air conditioning and not much of anything else running. On days like today where it's nice and cool, I got fans all over the place. My power drain goes from, that 4 or 5 kilowatts down to like about 800 or 900 with the fans going. And when ComEd sends me a picture, says, "Hey, you're one of the more efficient neighbors. Here's what your most efficient neighbor has done. Here's where you're at." I was 1 kilowatt hour more than the most efficient neighbors. Mm-hmm. But you have to get an idea of how much power your house uses so that you can size the generator appropriately. You don't want to necessarily install an 18 kilowatt generator if you've never used 18 kilowatts. I think the only time I came close to using anything more than that, 6 to 8 kilowatts is if the well pump is turned on, 2 kilowatts, plus the air conditioner, which is stalled because the capacitor was starting to deteriorate, and the starting surge goes to 12,000 watts. Yeah, it was kind of surprising watching that little meter just jump up to 12,000. I don't think it's supposed to go to 12,000. Didn't pop the breaker, but it probably came close. eventually it would start, and I called the guy out, and we replaced the capacitor in there, and then that starts more reliably. And so there's still a starting surge. I want to say it's probably maybe 6,000, but my meter isn't fast enough to detect it. I have a years ago, I think I gave a presentation on what it is. That's called a rainforest automation, and it does Bluetooth to my smart meter, and it shows me what my current power usage is. And it does this in real time. But it also does it, I'm sorry, it doesn't use Bluetooth, it uses Zigbee to make the connection. But it interferes a little bit with some of my channel usages in the house. So I have to deal with interference and try and avoid those channels where it's on. And it doesn't move. It's not frequency agile. Whatever the meter is on, that's where it's going to go, because it also transmits via Zigbee to the next meter, to the next meter, to the next meter, to it goes all the way close enough to the power line. And there's a transceiver up there, and that collects the other end, and that's how it sends it to ComEd. And the reason that you have your power meter or your power is reflected, if you ever look at my green data on your ComEd site, for the people that have that, it is reported in 30-minute intervals. They would do it more often than that, but they can't, the bandwidth is such that they can just get all the data in 30 minutes. If they tried to do it every 15 minutes, they wouldn't have enough bandwidth to have all that and be able to receive it all. And they don't want to lose it. And if power fails, they lose a 30-minute period. So if the power fails, they lose a period, but that's just 30 minutes. They can deal with 30 minutes. They're okay with that. So if you look at your green data around a power outage, you'll see where there was no power at all. It doesn't come back and then have the power used in that period before that. It just loses a whole bunch there. But with the same thing with the NICOR in our area. NICOR has electronic reading as well, but they do theirs on a different frequency, 900 megahertz, and they actually drive a car around to interrogate each meter. So they drive through your neighborhood, they interrogate all the meters, and they pull the data, and then they're happy. And they do that once a month. So as long as they drive through and they take all the information, you're good. But they don't have the same setup where meter talks to meter, and then sends it up, because they don't have power lines available. All of their gas lines are underground. But yes. Water meters, I'm not sure. I said they may have a similar type of thing where they have to drive around for water meters. But in my case, I have Keating Spring, and I pump it out of the ground myself. So, did you have a question, Dennis? You going to buy one of those 3,000-hour Generac?
Well, I don't know. I was just thinking about it. Do you have anything at your house, for instance, or what do you do?
I have an old Coleman 3,500 watt gasoline powered generator that I purchased new in 1998.
The only thing I'm concerned about basically would be, furnace in winter and maybe air conditioning in really super hot summer, but as being the primary things I want to be prepared for. But
yeah, you can get an extended warranty on it, but it doesn't say. I'm trying to see where it says lifetime. Generac lifetime.
Can you run your furnace or your air conditioning on yours?
I can't run the air conditioning. However, I can run the heating on it, but I have to do so. In 1998, the first year that I had it, we had an 18-hour power outage because of an ice storm, and I had to figure a way to both get water and electricity and heat. So I was able to pigtail a plug onto the other half of the switch for the furnace. So I'd flip the switch to off, and then the other side of the switch would be live, and that went to an outlet, to a plug and I could plug that into the generator. And although it would blip a little bit when the furnace started up, because the furnace blower was about 7 or 8 amps, and then the igniter is another 5 amps. So you start to get closer and closer to your 15 amp circuit. I mean, it did handle it okay, and it was able to run it. Once it started, it keeps on running, and it needs much less power. Another one that was more difficult was the well pump. My well pump is a 3/4 horsepower pump that's mounted about 170 feet down in the well, and it requires, like I said, about 2 kilowatts. So, but it's 220, so I had to pigtail using a regular line cord with 2 hots, and then wire it into a 220 plug it into the generator directly, and that's how I was able to run the well pump. So most people, when they have a power outage, they still have water supply from the village, as long as the village has some way of powering its pumps. But when that water tower gets emptied, then you don't have any more water. With air conditioner, to run an air conditioner, it needs 4,000, 5,000 watts, depending on the size of your house. And the starting surge has to be accommodated for in a generator as well. And then the other thing you have to look at for generators is whether or not you want a pure sine wave generator or not. Because if you need to have one of those generators because of your sensitive electronic equipment, some of those require cleaner power than you normally get off of a generator. And those generators usually cost double. A typical Generac is going to run your refrigerator and your well pump and some of the other stuff, but it won't necessarily run all of your computers, unless they're laptops. Laptops are relatively safe because a laptop power has its battery to smooth out any of the imperfections in the power supply. And they usually use the universal power supply as well. So your power supply, I look at the rating on one of these guys, I think it says 90 volts to 246. So it means anything that comes into that wall outlet between 90 and 246, why does it go down to 90 or 100 volts? Ever think about that when they see those universal power supplies? So what they have in Japan, they have 100 volt, 60 hertz in Japan. That's their power supply. So if you're going to make a universal power supply, better handle the Japanese market. And if you go across into Europe and so you got 220, 50 hertz, or 240 to 50 hertz. And in places like India, they have those old H-frame power. It looks like a big H, and that's what the power lines. And then when one of those lines falls and hits one of the other ones, you may have a 440 volt surge come down your power. Yes. We used to have a DC power supply that had a big multi-watt Zener diode in it, and that thing would burst into flame when they had one of those surges. But knowing those things, you can start to prepare for some of these. And generator might be a good, if you have a need for like an oxygen generator or something like that, by all means, you need a power supply of some sort that's going to keep it running for you. So when power fails, because some of those people that did not survive down in the Houston area, or even on the south side of Chicago, because their O2 generators weren't running without power. So if you had a generator that sits there and kicks in and it runs on natural gas until your power comes back, you're okay. Now they say that 3,000 hours on the Generac is supposed to be good for 25 to 30 years, but then they only offer a 5, 7, or 10-year warranty available if you want to purchase it. Tells you what the real lifetime of that thing might possibly be. Because I'm sure they're not going to get stuck if it fails within the warranty period.
Mm. And from what I've seen, I mean, you buy a generator like that, let's say mid-size, $5,000, but then from what I've read, the installation costs $4,000 to $5,000 as well. I mean, it's something ridiculous.
You have to have it wired with what's called a transfer switch. Transfer switch sits there right next to your electrical panel. Hope you got room in the basement where the electrical panel is. Okay, because it's going to sit there right next to that, and you choose which breakers you're going to have tied over to go to the other source. And basically, they disconnect your wires from the one panel, run them into the transfer switch, and then a wire goes back to where they were on the electrical panel.
Okay.
So in the case of a switchover, it's going to switch you over to that power. That's how it can do it, but it'll interrupt in the process of doing it. It's not instantaneous. There'll be a blip as it switches over. Now, if you have something that's sensitive to a power blip, like a computer, it will reboot.
Or
Or it may not come back at all.
or your TV, a stereo system, etc., because it can take up to 30 seconds for that generator to really kick in and produce the power needed.
Yeah, because you want to temper it. It'll allow. Normally, they want to set these things up. They're not meant to be UPSs. They are meant to handle a power outage, pure outage. So now, if you do have a full outage, how long before it should turn on? Because most power interruptions are 6 seconds or less.
Okay.
Okay, so most of your power interruptions, the lights blink, and like one VCR upstairs from 30 years ago blinks its display that says, "I lost power. I don't know what time it is."
So they're building in an intentional delay of a little bit.
Well, because they don't want it to fire up the generator needlessly.
Yeah.
The generator also fires up every once a month to verify it works. Okay, so it's going to use some of that as well, just to say, yep, I'm working, it'll run for 10 minutes and shut down. But I could tell who had generators in my neighborhood because I could hear them fire up because they weren't exactly quiet. And I could hear some of the ones that had fired up, like, okay, he's got a generator. I didn't know he had one, but now he does. Okay, and it's a little on the noisier side too. And it continued to run after power was restored. So either it didn't see the power was restored, or for some reason it was set to continue to run. Because sometimes when power comes back on again, it's not on for very long and it falls back again. And you don't want to keep on because that's what damages your electronic equipment. Worst thing you can do for a refrigerator is turn it on, let it fire up the compressor, then power cycle. Because you're hitting the compressor while it's already been compressing fluid, and that's when it surges, and it will either pop its reset button and then damage everything that's in your refrigerator, or it might just, the compressor may die. That's why air conditioners have a delay built in. So if they get turned off and turned on again within a certain period of time, they have a delay circuit built in, so they don't kick the compressor in until after that delay is expired. Otherwise, it draws, 40 or 50 amps on the 220 line. I used to have one in my previous house that would pop the breaker every time that happened.
And when a generator kicks in, you can get a surge from that. When the electricity comes back on from the main source, that can be another voltage spike, and the voltage spikes kill electronics.
Yeah, they're pretty good about that. Now, how do you protect against electronics? Well, you have two options for electronics. You can put UPSs on, but then the UPS has to be big enough to handle the load from the device. The other thing you can use is called a line conditioner. You could get a line conditioner. Literally, what they used to do at some larger places like Motorola had in Schaumburg, they had a giant motor generator unit that was in the basement, and that would automatically take power and basically spin a large motor, which spun a generator, and that generator supplied the power to the UPS circuits in the building. And then when power failed, the generator could be the power would be generated by the other banks of storage that we had in those cases. But that would filter some of the ones that we had as well, because you needed to have clean power for things like Cisco switches. Your main core router, you don't want to bounce the power on. Because it's controlling, how many gigabytes of data flying back and forth. Other choices, I mean, like I said, you could do the Powerwall thing too. That basically generates clean sinusoidal AC waveforms, and all your electronics would be happy with that. But it's an expensive proposition, because you're basically putting something the size of a electric car battery in the garage to supply your business or house for however long you think you need. Now go back to the calculation that I presented. Typically, your power is out for 525 minutes a year. Okay, you could go ahead and do the calculation of 3,000 hours, 60 minutes divided by 525. 342 years is what it would normally handle to get the 3,000 hours. No, that's not right. Let's try that again. 3,000 hours, yes. Here. Yes. That's better. 8.75 hours. 3,000. Yeah, 342 years is what it should last. If that's what it actually needed. But some of your outages are longer than others. Depends on whether is your power above ground or below ground that you know. Is the feed to your house below or above ground?
Below.
So that part is safe. Do you know where it comes up and goes into power lines?
No, but I haven't seen any power lines close to my neighborhood.
They're there. You just haven't seen them. Okay. Because the typical power line you got is about 7,200 volts in residences. Other places will do 12,000 volt power supply, 12 or 14K for those. And of course, it depends on how many amp service each house has. If your house has 100 amp service because it's an old house, that doesn't need as much power as a newer one that has a 200 or 400 amp panel. But they have to plan for that kind of power when they figure out everybody who's going to be on the same power line. Somewhere's around here, and I haven't located it recently, I have the local map when they were replacing some of the underground cable in my front yard. And I have peeked at the map like, oh, that's nice. That's a map. He said, oh, you want it? It's yours. I am on Charlie phase. Okay. Across the street is on alpha phase. I believe beta is behind me somewhere. So there's 3 phases. When you see the power poles and you see 3 lines there, you have 3-phase power coming on those lines. And they siphon it off to each one of the neighborhoods, as they said, as they see fit. Okay, so this neighborhood's going to be on this phase. So they can get 3 times the number of homes with the same running of power. And that's how they are doing it more efficiently, by sending 3-phase power down the power lines. Of course, that means there's a lot of power there. And, if you do the calculation, you can say, when I step down 7,000 to 240, okay, that means with the same amperage, I can support 29 residences with that approximately. And assuming that you have 100 amp service and they can run 100 amps through that thing, that would be 29 houses through that same service. And if they're doing 12 kilovolts or 14 kilovolts, like my church uses 12 kilovolts because that's the local one in Barrington happens to have higher density of houses, so they need more power. Out here, where it's buried underground, they like to have it 7 kilovolts. So in case something shorts under the ground, it doesn't make Mount Vesuvius. Because when it does short, you will see smoke and steam come out of the ground. And yes, dirt does burn. I've heard of people that have been digging and they happen to accidentally nick the cable. And they have to call ComEd and have them shut the line down and seal it up and eventually replace. Anytime there's a nick in the cable, they end up replacing the cable. Used to be that most of the cables that they would bury had built-in glue into the jacket. So if anything got cut, it would grab a hold of the dirt around it and help seal it. They would do that with the Comcast cable, and they did that with the power cable. So if you ever pick up an old power cable and strip it back to see the aluminum conductors inside, it's sticky on the inside. But then I'm probably one of the few people that has ever recycled that kind of cable in the past. And it's multiple cores. If you ever look at a power cable that's about yay big in diameter, it's got like about, 8, I want to say it would probably be equivalent to 0 gauge wire tied together in a bundle. And that's just like one section of the wire. And they use smaller diameters when they run it up to your house, of course, but it's got to be able to handle 200 amp service. If you have a 200 amp panel, they have to size 200 amp cable coming from the transformer in the yard. You have a transformer that's outside that you share with one other house?
There is a small box about the size of half the size of a refrigerator that's way out back between me and my neighbor.
You share it with one other neighbor.
One other?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know how many neighbors it might feed or whatever, but
if you look around in some subdivisions, at least with our panels here, which were typically 200 amp service, you share one with each. Okay. Each pair of neighbors have one. So, and mine happens to be on the property line between the two houses.
Yeah, ours is in
and when they replaced the cable underneath, they had to go underneath my yard, underneath the old cul-de-sac, underneath the neighbor on the other side to get to the transformer on that side. That's where they did digging their holes and they ran the cable. But they didn't replace the one on the other side of the transformer to my other neighbor. Said, oh, that part of the cable is fine. They could detect how much leakage on this little piece of the cable was actually generated. So they said, yeah, we're leaking some power here. We're going to replace it. And it was kind of weird. Did they lay it in a straight trench? No. It's all over the place. And they said, does anybody update the maps when the guy comes out for Julie? Because they're always marking the wrong place. Because Comcast has put in their cable 2 or 3 times. AT&T has put in their cable 2 or 3 times. ComEd has put in theirs twice now. So the map they have of my area that has what is what, I have to go out and let them know. Says, no, Comcast doesn't have that cable there anymore. Neither does AT&T. They're out here in the frontage about 3 feet away from the actual road.
So when that's a good point. When they replace a cable, like for cable TV and that, and they go out to mark them,
yeah,
are they still detecting the old cables, even though there should be nothing current running through them now?
They haven't disconnected the ground wire on the old cable. If they had, they would be able to find the right cable. But because both of them are making noise, they have to mark in both places.
Okay.
And they connect to the ground because that's the thing that's closest to the outside of the cable. And then they put a signal through that, and that's what they're picking up when they go. Boop, 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 boop. because they bring their sensor over.
I thought they would just disconnect the old one and hook up the new wire to bury, but
They don't disconnect it all the way because it's still grounded in some places.
okay.
So at least that's what I found out, because they mismarked it all the time and said, "Oh, that's where it showed up." Like, here, look over here. Oh yeah. And for gas lines, there's a wire that goes along with the plastic gas line that they use now.
Ah, okay.
Gas line is plastic. The one that's out there for the main, however, which is running higher pressure, well, it's the same pressure as the plastic gas line until it gets to your meter, and then it drops it down. But when they put a tap in on the gas line, how do you think they fasten it? Nobody knows?
Mm.
They weld it. They actually they put a thing on there that's clamped on, and they actually tack weld it, and then they put a bead all the way around it, and then they run the tap through. And the tap is both a tap that goes through and allows gas to come through, and can also be screwed back up and block the gas. So that's how they can shut gas off or turn gas on at the street, by using this adapter that's welded onto the steel outside of the gas line. That was kind of weird, using an arc welder on a gas line. Isn't that kind of, they have a special union of welders with Nicor that does nothing more than weld onto the main.
And you said, so you said when they run it up to my house, there's a wire that goes with the.
They bury a wire with it. Yes.
With current running through it? Is that how the wire?
Nope. Just used so they can see where it is when they're trying to locate it when Julie comes out.
So there's no current in the wire at all, just a plain piece of wire, that copper wire maybe, that they can
a piece of yellow jacketed wire.
They can detect that deep with their sensor.
Because they put the transmitter on by your meter, because it's attached to your meter, so they can click to your meter, and then they can follow the gas line all the way out to the main.
Okay.
Yep.
So they're attaching it at the main.
And it's attached to the main too, so they could actually follow the main for a little bit too.
So they are running kind of a current through it to find it.
They only when they need to locate it, and they're only putting high frequency through it, and high frequencies go through the surface of metallic objects. They don't go through the core. Higher the frequency, the surface effect becomes more effect. And it's enough so they can transmit, so they can detect it, and that's it. And they use a super sensitive detector to find it. Now, I don't know what they are used for the power cable. The power cable, they can just basically look for power. Because depending on that voltage, and depending on how close you can get to it, because I think the power cable is only down 39 inches. If you were to sit there and put multi-stranded wire for several hundred feet and made it as parallel to the power line as possible, and you took either end of that, you could probably light up a light bulb with it. In fact, this used to be that sometimes the ranchers would, when they had their barbed wire going underneath power lines, they would connect a fluorescent tube to it and have it lit up all the time. But that draws power away from the power lines, the main power lines, the 145 kilovolt ones. So they sort of frown on people stealing power by running a barbed wire or wire fence around next to the power line. Yes. All these little things that you hear when you talk to the power line guys and such. Although most of the ones I've ever talked to only dealt with the 12 kilovolt ones. And then I've seen stuff that they've left behind. I said, what's this thing? That's about a foot long and it's copper and it's got insulations on it. And said, oh, that's a fuse. Yeah. All right. Okay. Any other questions we got here today? Yes, go ahead, Sid.
I thought I saw these. You said sump pumps life of 2 to 3 years. Did that say?
Not much longer. Do you have a water softener?
No.
They last longer without a water softener.
I have my sumps here are original. They've been in since the house was built in 1999. They're still running.
And you sure they're working?
Yeah, yeah. I hear them when they
I mean,
go, and there's no
I've had
water in the
some
basement.
last. I've had some last as long as 10 years if they were all plastic or they have the outside shell of plastic. But if you're dumping something like brine residue from a water softener, or if you have condensate, if you have a significant amount of condensate from a gas furnace or a water heater, if you have like a high efficiency water heater or a gas furnace, the condensate from gas furnaces is acidic, and that can eat away at the stainless steel pumps. The brine
You
just,
said acidic. Okay.
yeah.
My brain hit Hasidic first, and I'm going, why are they Jewish?
But both of those things can deteriorate. I've had ones that were made of stainless steel and they've corroded way before their time. Even to the point where I've considered trying to find a way to run the water softener drain line out specifically into a drain tile so it went outside, but I'd have to provide some sort of air gap capability so it didn't freeze solid and it would continue to drain. That's still a work in progress for me.
I
I
actually
may
have
do
one
that.
on each side of the basement.
Well, it's probably not two sump pumps. One is the sump pump, one is an ejector pit.
I don't know what that.
Okay. If they're sealed with a vent tube going to it, more than likely it's an ejector pit, and that pumps into your sewer system to go out. You're allowed to collect water that has gone into the center of your basement. That's like from a floor drain or from a like an air conditioner drain or the condensate on a high efficiency furnace. All of that's allowed, and a downstairs toilet could go into an ejector pit and then be pumped into your sewer. A sump pump is only for drain water, and that's not supposed to go into your sewer. They don't like it because that supercharges the sewer, and then the guy on the low end of the street that's connected to the sewer loses. You can get to the point where if you are always in the low section, you have to have a special device installed out in your yard, which has a back check valve, huge back check valve, and a pump that can pump its sewage around the back check valve when it's pressurized in the wrong direction. Yeah, that's what happens when you're at the low end of the the sewer system.
I thought they changed the law that sumps couldn't go into the sewer system anymore. When I lived in Niles, they paid to put new sumps in every house that shot the water outside.
Yeah, because they don't want that going into the sewer because the sewer is not the storm sewer. Okay, the storm sewer is for rainwater. The regular sewer is for sewage. So one goes to the stream, the other one goes to the sewer plant.
Oh,
But
except
even
the
then,
water-
there's things that people put down in toilets that they should never put in. Flushable wipes aren't. They
There you
clog up the sewer system. Always. If you ever talk to a plumber, he said the only thing you can flush down there is human waste, and then you might be able to use a couple sheets of paper, which is toilet paper.
yeah, yeah.
I think it was last year, Schaumburg though said that they were putting some. They said they were putting some kind of a colorant into the storm sewers or sewers to see if it's coming up out of sump pumps and in your houses or something. In other words, they were checking for illegal connections somehow.
The way
But-
they would do that is they seal off the storm sewer and then they blow smoke in. And then they look to see whose gutters are shooting up smoke to know that their gutters are connected to the storm sewer.
Okay, okay,
They can't see a sump pump because the sump pump usually has a back check valve.
okay.
Okay, and they're not really pressurizing it, but they are pushing smoke in so they can see if it comes up. Like, because you're not supposed to connect gutters or sump pumps or drain lines to that, and the drain lines usually connect to gutters, and then they come out next to the building, and yep, you're in violation. But then, like, that doesn't handle the situation where the founding fathers of our church, when they installed something that connected to the storm sewer, put a little peat trap in, and that lets the peat trap fill with water, and then the smoke can't come up and go. So all you need is a trap with water to keep it from showing up like that.
Well, the water was shooting out of the PVC pipe out on my patio with the new one. So I didn't like that, so I talked to the village. So the village installed the new sewer where the pipe was coming out in the back. So they put a joint then on the PVC to go into the new sewer they built outside.
It's probably not going into the sewer, but a storm sewer.
No.
Because if it went into the sewer, okay, and it didn't have a P-trap in it, you would have sewer smell every time you walk by it.
Yes, that seemed like a lot of money to spend. They spent money to put the new sumps in, then they put money to put a new sewer out back to catch the water coming off.
What they did was they put in a new drain line to carry the surface water away somewhere else to the storm sewer, because they probably felt they were liable by putting in your new sump pump. So now they're liable for causing a drainage condition for you and your neighbor. So they had to continue to remedy it. When I first moved into my subdivision, they had ditches in the front here, but the ditches basically didn't carry the water. It didn't drain properly. And they ended up, because of the water would always collect in there. We had a couple of the 100-year rains, and the subdivision behind me had water that was 12 inches high on the roadway, because I was driving around with an Astrovan and it came up to my hubs. And they ended up changing the drainage here. So underneath the rock in my front ditch, there is an 8-inch diameter drain tile that carries it back toward the cul-de-sac and goes across the street, and then eventually ties into a 30-inch drain culvert that takes a stream underneath my subdivision. So it's above ground behind me, and it goes underneath my subdivision, and it comes out on the other side of my subdivision back to a stream again. And it's a 30-inch culvert. And they had to replace it with concrete underneath my main road out here back in 2016, because the original one was done with corrugated metal, and that rusted through, and there's a roadway going over it. And their policy now is anytime they replace any roadway surface that has corrugated underneath it, it's replaced with a concrete piece. But the problem they ran into when they're busy replacing this, you know how the electrical people are busy pulling cables with this nice new drilling machine and such, and it drills through? When they put in that power cable between me and my neighbor on the other side of the cul-de-sac, they drilled through the corrugated conduit. So the power line was pulled through where the water was running. So they had to deal with that when they dug it up, like, we're going to have to go around it.
I love it. I love it. I got the new Sam's Club flyer that's starting soon. Just to be appropriate, they're listing on sale a Generac Guardian Series Wi-Fi enabled 22,000 watt LP 18,500 watt NG standby with automatic transfer switch for $54.99. 600 off it says.
Yeah, and then you're going to need to spend probably a couple grand to have it wired in, at least. Depends on whether you have your favorite electrician or not,
Yeah.
because
He
they won't let
charges more.
He does? Okay.
He's a friend of mine, so he charges more.
I don't blame them. I would too.
Ooh, ooh.
Plumbers are $95 an hour now, yeah. But my master plumber friend still owes me something because every time he can't get his back up to work, he's giving me a call. But I was able to find out from him when I had to replace a drain on a tub, the joint that's used behind the tub where it goes into the drain is called a Marvel joint. Nothing to do with Marvel Comics. It was a Marvel joint before it was Marvel. And I could not remember that name for the life of me recently when I was trying to think about it. Like, what is that name? It was a very common name. I run into it almost all the time. Marvel.
Especially
Yes,
if you do comic books.
Yeah, they do comic books. Yeah. Kirby and Stan Lee, yes. No, it's but that's the slip joint that you have to use on the drain that goes into another thing so you can tighten it and it'll become watertight and doesn't leak. The reason I had to replace it was because some fool had a brass overflow connected to a copper drain pipe, and in between he used the steel nipple. Does not work. Dissimilar metals dissolve. And usually it's the more active metal, and it's always the steel piece. That was probably only 2 years old. It was completely rusted out.
Wow.
It corroded out. In fact, it broke apart in my hand when I was trying to pull it apart.
The other thing Sam's Club has going on sale is an A-iPower 2300 watt inverter generator with CO sensor, telescopic handle, and wheels for $280.
How many watt was it?
2300.
Yeah, that's on the light side. You can run maybe one appliance with that. 2300 is just less than 20 amps. So you could run an appliance on it. You couldn't probably run a well pump on it. Might be a little bit beyond it. I think the one I got was an old Coleman. It was 3600 watts. And I think it had more for starting surge. But mine was, and the other thing that you look for if you're looking for those kind of generators is does it have an idle mode? Okay, because if it has an idle mode, the generator can spin down and go much slower and just sort of coast. Like if you need a sump pump to run occasionally or a refrigerator run occasionally and it's not running all the time, then you want an idle control, and that makes your gas run twice as long on the same amount of gas because it's not running all the time. It doesn't have to run and keep the motor spinning so it can give the demand for the power immediately. And it takes a fraction of a second for it to spin up because it's got like a solenoid, and as you draw more than 20 watts, so you put a big fan on it or something, turn it on, and it does that and goes up to high speed mode. Yeah, it was a plumbing supply house that you found it on, right? Because if you go to Home Depot and ask them for a Marvell unit, they say, what? Go to Menards, what? No.
By the way, Sid, Costco also sells home generators too.
Are they on sale too?
I do see there's some big one that's normally $6,500 to $8,000 is up to $500 off. But the others don't say they're on sale. No.
You have to log in to see the price.
Well, I have the advantage of all the utilities were buried here years ago, and there's the one of the big boxes on the corner, and the only thing on that big box is my house and the traffic lights at the corner.
Okay, so that's 2 users. They'd have a limited number of connections on it, so they're not trying to put 3 or 4 houses on it, unless they were much smaller houses, because you got to have a place to put the cable in, and each one of those you have 2 cables plus a neutral, a ground, and not all the time do they run the neutral. Sometimes they just put a line in the ground, and that's your neutral, and you pick up the neutral on a ground rod on your house outside. But if it's really wet area, they will run a separate neutral line. But the neutral doesn't have to carry the same amount of power. In fact, the neutral should ideally have none. It's only when you have, that's why when you have a breaker failure in your panel, and if the neutral opens up, you have the wrong voltage on one side or the other side, depending on what devices are powering on. So when your neutral opens up, that's a bad thing. And you will see like much higher voltage swings. Like if you have an electric stove, the electric stove wins and the refrigerator loses. But most electric stove elements are 220 anyway. It's only the 110 portions that actually draw the power. But if it used to be on some of the demand circuits for 3-phase in buildings, if you could balance all 3 phases equally, you would generate 0 demand. You would not see any power from demand because the demand is from the imbalance. They can't handle the imbalance, and they charge you for the imbalance. Yes. The other thing you want to be careful of if you're buying a generator and you're calculating by hand your power that you needed is what is the power factor of your appliance that you are plugging into it. By law, almost all the electronic devices produced now have to have a unity power factor. In other words, it should look like an electric light bulb, like an incandescent bulb. Unity power factor of 1. That means there's no delay between current and voltage. And when you have a capacitor input power supply, like the old power packs that you used to get on laptops and some other type of computer power supplies that were not unity factor, they would be, maybe power factor of 0.7. That means for 100 watts that you're using, the ComEd had to put in 140 or 150 watts so that you would get your 100 watts. So they have to put in more for supply, even though you were only pulling some of it because of the power factor, because it's pulling it out of phase with what its ideal power factor. And because the generator has to be able to put in what the demand is, not what the use is. So most AC powered motors are unity power factor or very close to unity power factor. So furnaces that run with AC motors, you're fine. If they have a DC motor in there to be more efficient, then they can have other than a unity power factor, and that may be worse for you. But electronics, especially where the electronics, if the design of the power supply is there's a rectifier bridge and it charges a high voltage capacitor, and then it uses that high voltage capacitor through an electronic switching mechanism to step the voltage down through a toroidal transformer, and then re-rectify it and have it available for your 3.3 volts for your for your desktop. That's where it can really start to have an effect on those kinds of things. Because you're talking sometimes 700-800 watts, a kilowatt or something on your computer. Yes.
Well,
but
then
you're not worried too much about running a lot of your computerized stuff.
Well,
but
you're not a gamer then, because there you can get up to 1,200 or 1,500 watt power supplies.
my son-in-law and my daughter have those kind of power supplies. Yes. I think he's running a Ryzen 9 now. But those are a little bit more power efficient. Have you seen the no recall by Intel about their Core i9s?
No.
I believe 13th and 14th generation. There's some problems with some of those.
The 14 I knew about, yes. They were crashing a lot. The one question I had that I didn't see an answer for was, are these people overclocking their stuff?
And I hadn't seen that either. Whether or not if it's advertised to be overclocked and they overclock it and fails, that's one thing. But if they're not overclocking it and it can also fail.
Yeah, I don't know all the details, but on Intel chips, if the whole identification number ends with a K or a KF, they're overclockable.
They are allowed to be overclocked, and they should cover the warranty on it. Then.
Right.
So if you're not using a K or KX, was it?
K or KF.
KF, yes. The only ones I have a K on one of my machines. So
Yeah,
it can be overclocked, but I've never overclocked it because when I've used it, it liked to run very nicely at 42 degrees Celsius.
Right.
Like, that's nice and cool. I'll keep it there.
Right.
This one runs hot all the time. The one I'm running on right now.
What's the purpose of overclocking?
Pardon?
What's the purpose of overclocking?
It's something that used to be done because you had older technology and everybody wanted more speed. So they'd overclock your CPU, the memory, your GPU if you had one, just to get more speed and performance out of whatever they originally paid for the computer.
The gamers would be able to have better response on their games, so it wouldn't be as sluggish. Because by overclocking, you're increasing the speed of your computer by 25 or 30%.
Right.
So you mean if they're playing one of those online video games where they're moving a man and shooting, they could actually make him move faster?
Not on a.
Well, it would be the display updates quicker because sometimes it lags. It's a little bit sluggish, and they're updating 60 frames a second, not 30 or whatever interlaced or something. And they may actually use even higher refresh rates because they don't want as much lag.
Yeah, and the other thing is that more newer computers, overclocking makes zero sense. In fact, some of the devices, they recommend under voltage, which means that you're really running at a lower power rating and a little bit slower speed. Because things are getting ridiculous. Your SSD NVMEs are getting so bad that you absolutely have to have in just a couple-year-old machines severe heat sinks with a lot of airflow, or even with a fan in addition to the heat sink. And it's getting to the point where you may have to have liquid cooling, not only on the CPU, but also on your graphic card and your SSD.
And the problem with liquid cooling is it's got connectors that could leak.
Nah, it wouldn't leak.
They can leak. They can go. They can.
I know.
That's a calamity I didn't mention.
Yeah.
But yes, and they are special metric connectors too.
Yep.
Ask me how I know.
I
know people that have had leaks.
Okay.
You don't try. It's got liquid running through it. You want to be extra careful.
Right.
Well, that reminds me, when I was looking at whole house generators, online, they did talk about air cooled, but some are liquid cooled also. I don't know.
Yes.
It's got a motor, and you have to realize to run an 18 kilowatt generator, you're talking a 20 horsepower motor.
Right. So
my 3600 watt one is 5.5 horsepower.
And here's a thing, because I used to ride motorcycles. If you had an air-cooled engine, like a Harley Davidson as an example, Um, about your engine would have to be rebuilt every 20,000 hours. A liquid cool engine, just a two-cylinder, might go 50,000 miles. A four-cylinder liquid cool engine might go 100,000 miles before you had to rebuild it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Liquid cool runs cooler, but then you have to worry about how often do you change the antifreeze?
That used to be a frequent thing,
Yeah.
whereas it seems like most of the antifreeze that's used in more modern cars lasts much longer
Well, it
before.
depends on if it is an acid-free anti-flush or not.
Right.
Yes, because that's what can cause it breaks down and it no longer provides its protection. I think the Prius had a 10-year on the main engine and 15-year on the inverter. But since my inverter failed, they replaced it and the antifreeze for free.
Yeah,
But I mean,
it's crazy. There's a lot of things that sound great, like liquid cool in your computers, but bottom line is most of them do leak eventually. So
yeah.
that means every I don't know 2, 3, 4 years you may have to literally overhaul the entire liquid cooling system with a newer one because the old one starts becoming too unreliable. But you also have I don't remember if they really took off, but I remember years back computers that were actually immersed in mineral oil in what looked like an aquarium. And they were liquid cooled, but you didn't have to worry about essentially short circuiting anything. So that was another one, but I don't think that ever really went over big.
Yeah. Okay. So when you were talking about, cooling and stuff like that, I was thinking about some of these new server farms that are opening up in areas that aren't too far away from us.
Yeah.
Like Google wants to put one somewheres, and HP had put some someplace, and I guess the old Foxconn is going to be a place that they're going to put a server farm. Um, and I'm trying to remember how many acres that some of these things are huge. And each one of these cabinets, I looked to see what the current amount of power they use. When we used to populate some computer cabinets, and this was with some larger tandem computers way back when, before they had server racks in 1U form, we would allow about 3,300 watts per cabinet on a 19-inch rack, 72 inches high. Now they're running between 5 and 7 kilowatts per rack. Okay. And that's a lot of BTUs.
Well, Microsoft created I'll call it an encapsulated data center. I think it was for an experiment. And it was submerged underwater.
Well, it still has to dissipate the heat wherever it goes.
Well,
Yeah.
they're using the body of water to keep things chilled.
Yeah. Let's see. So each one of those, each one of those server racks at 5 to 7 is generating about 2 tons of air conditioning per server
Gee.
rack. 21,000 BTUs, 10,000 BTUs per ton. 21,000 BTUs in a server rack. So that's where the power is going, not necessarily for the unit. It's going for the air conditioning to pull the heat out and put it out somewhere. Yeah. And with AI, it's going to get probably worse because some of those are probably more power hogs.
Oh, I'm certain of that.
some of these towns that are allowing to put these server farms and stuff in, they want to charge these people like an extra electricity tax. And I didn't
Yeah.
really understand
Well,
why.
it's like
Well,
the people who were mining cryptocurrency in their own server farm, per se, and those places would get so hot, they had an infrared image that a helicopter going over with an infrared detector in it could spot one of these illegal server farms and get them shut down, or they had to pay exorbitant fees and stuff because it's taxing everybody else's power usage.
well, he's either got a server farm or he's growing marijuana under grow lights.
All I know is it's a case where even in the homemade server farm for cryptocurrency mining, I'm sure they were using a pretty fair amount of power just for air conditioning, cooling, so that their equipment didn't fry within a short period of time.
Okay.
Well, also keep in mind that if you have a server farm going and there's going to be any sort of brownout or anything like that, you don't think they're going to brown out the server farm first.
Sure, they will. Sure, they will.
Yeah, when you can't do your Chase online banking because the server farm ran out of power, that was going to be hell to pay. Yes.
Well, if it's winter time, they can shut off all of our heating electricity, and we can just go over there and warm ourselves around the perimeter.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true.
All the snow will melt over where the server farms are.
Just like a nuclear reactor's cooling pond.
There'll be a cloud of it. Is that a nuclear reactor over there? No, that's a server farm.
Actually, those cooling ponds have attracted manatees in Florida.
Oh, yeah?
They like the warm water.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, I see that we are running probably way past our normal time here, but I think we've had a good meeting.
Well, you also started late.
We started late too, but we've made up for it right now. So we've had
We
our
sure
full
did.
2 hours. You want to go ahead and finish the recording, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay.